Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and today is my weekly wrap up. It is Saturday afternoon and I normally try to get my weekly wrap ups to go live on Sunday morning. So my goal is always to have it ready by Saturday night. Therefore, I do not have a great deal of time. So I'm going to do my best to be concise, to know what I'm saying and not ramble and go on rabbit trails and not say all the time so as to reduce and or eliminate the need for editing. And if someone comes and interrupts me, well, they're just going to have to be on my video because I'm not going to have time to do much editing here. So that's my challenge. Think I can do it? Let's try. So, last week I did not post a weekly wrap up. I did mention most of the books that I read last week. I mean, I say that like there was a lot of them, but the couple of books that I read and the stories that I read last week, I mentioned either in my Victober ranking wrap up or in my video of my vlog of Edgar Allan Poe visiting his house. So if you are curious and you really are dying to know what I read last week, you can find those reviews in the links to those videos in the description box. And I read last week, so you know what you're looking for, I read several stories and poems by Edgar Allan Poe, and that's in the Edgar Allan Poe video. And I finished A Dark Night's Work by Elizabeth Gaskell, which is in the, there I go, Victober ranking video, as well as my review of Spurgeon's book, John Plowman's Talks, which I also read for Victober. So today I have another book that I kind of bumped into this week that I will mention, and then two others that I finished this week. Before I get to that though, I want to share with you a little bit of the fun I had today, take you on a little shopping with me to our local Barnes & Noble. My son had a birthday party. Well, it wasn't his birthday party. He went to a birthday party of a friend of his. And after we dropped him off, we went to the farmer's market nearby, which is possibly one of the best ways ever to spend a Saturday morning. And then we still had time to kill before we had to pick him up, so we went to the Barnes & Noble, which was also conveniently located nearby. And I browsed around, so I didn't buy anything. I was just kind of window shopping, but it was fun. So let's go take a little stroll through Barnes & Noble, shall we? So first up, we have this one set in Regency times. I love a good Regency novel. And this one, it says on the bottom something about being very, oh, right there, fiercely feminist. So I'm not sure if I would like that or not. Regency feminism is not modern feminism, so maybe. And then this one looks really intriguing about the goddaughter of Queen Victoria. That looks really interesting. The Miniaturist, I've heard about this one. If you've read this one, let me know if it's something you think that I would enjoy. It sounds like an intriguing kind of story. I think it might have like magical realism or fantastical elements. The Jane Austen Society. And this one, I wasn't sure if it was completely fiction or if it's based on a true story. I don't know. And then look at this chunker of a beauty. I've never actually read War and Peace by Tolstoy. I've read Anna Karenina a couple of times. Really like it. Have not read War and Peace. That's definitely a hole I want to fill. This intrigues me. We went to Ford's Theater where Lincoln died this summer, and I think I actually saw this book there, maybe, or heard about it. Anyway, this is an intriguing story I'd like to read. My husband actually said that he wouldn't mind getting this book for Christmas. It's kind of a big book for him, but he does like biographies of certain people, and he's a little bit intrigued by Elon Musk. So, well, aren't we all? Interesting character, to be sure. And then this one is a signed copy, and it took me forever to open up to the page with the signature, so wait for it. Wait a little there we go. There it is, the signature. And this, if you are a Harry Potter fan or have a Harry Potter fan in your house, you might like this edition. Do they have all of the books in this series in this kind of edition? I'm thinking it might be a good Christmas gift for my older son, or even for my niece. And this just looked so charming, as it says on the cover, but I wasn't sure if it was a book actually written by him or just selections from his other books. I was trying to figure that out unsuccessfully. If you know, let me know. It just looks like a really lovely book. And then I was inspired. I definitely want to get myself a Christmas puzzle to put together in December. My husband was voting for this one. He loves Lego. It is kind of a cool puzzle. I thought that one was beautiful. And I can't believe it's 1,000 pieces. And this one is New York. The other was London, New York. I like both of them. And this caught my eye. Totally putting this on my TBR. It goes through the real places in London that Dickens writes about in his books. Some of which are not, no longer there, at least not in the same way. So that's just really intriguing. I think I need to read this before I go to London again, which our goal is to go there for our 20th anniversary, and we celebrated our 17th or 18th this year. I think it's going to be our 18th coming up. 2023, 24. I think February 24 will be our 18th. And then a biography about Mozart that looks intriguing. Mozart was an intriguing person for me. And that looked like an interesting biography of his life in context. This looks cool. I'm not much of a movie person, but this is about 52 different movies that are screen adaptations of books. And some of them more of a stretch than others, but like more inspired by, oh look, there I dropped it. Yeah, that's just lovely. You can't hear it in the video, but while I'm looking at this book, somebody next to me totally did the same thing with a different book. Just completely dropped it on the floor. So apparently it's a thing. Anyway, that looked like one I might put on my Christmas list. And I'm definitely putting this on my Christmas list. It is a book about coffee, from the beans to the roasting to the processing to the brewing and the different methods and the different types of all of those things. And then recipes for the preparation and serving of coffee. It's my kind of book, guys. Totally putting it on my Christmas list. And then this cute little bag there. And then I was looking for my husband because I lost him. And I found him, and he was looking at a book with lots of pictures because that's his favorite kind. And then I cannot wait to watch the Netflix, but I need to find somebody who has a Netflix. And I figured that I should also read this book by him. I really, really, really loved All the Light We Cannot See. And this one got good reviews also, although it's totally different, it sounds like, in style and theme and everything. With some maybe magical realism or fantastical elements, I'm not really sure. But I definitely want to read this one. And this one, I think Carolyn Reeds had read this and really loved it. And it looks like it might be a beautiful story to read at Christmas time. So I'm thinking about that. Let me know if you have read it or not, and if you think I would like it, if you enjoyed it. It's not very long. And that's it. My visit to Barnes & Noble. And now to the books that I read this week. Well, to be fair, 2 of them I have read. The third one is in process, so I'll get to that in a moment. For the Historathon 4.0 reading challenge for Lindsay's Little Library, her prompts, one of them was to read a book from a favorite time period. And one of my favorite time periods to read about is the Regency era in England. And so this is the book I picked for that, which I heard many people giving really good reviews about it in various social media avenues and BookTube and whatever. So I read Lakeshire Park by Megan Walker. It was my first book by this author, but not my first book in this series or imprint, which is proper romance. I enjoyed it. It is a romance novel set in Regency England at a house party, which is always a fun trope or setting to have. I love the setting of an English country estate and um, just the fun situations that arise at a house party. This one had a bit of a unique twist in that there's a pair of sisters and they are about to lose everything. And so this is kind of the oldest sister's last ditch effort to marry off her younger sister because she feels responsible for her and wants her to be settled um, somewhere securely with a good husband, because back then women didn't have a lot of options. There were career options, but it wasn't considered, ideal for a genteel woman of noble birth to pursue a career of any kind. So she wanted her sister not to have to do that, but to be settled in a good marriage. So that's kind of her goal as she sets out to this house party. But it does not go as she intended. And the younger sister does end up finding a good match, but so does the older sister, of course, as well. But in a little bit of an unexpected way. There are hints of maybe Beatrice and Benedict in Much Ado About Nothing, or Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice, in that the two, the older sister and the gentleman that she ends up with at the end, they don't, well, she doesn't really like him at all. He seems to be intrigued by her or interested by her, but she doesn't like him at all. And so they have a constant kind of battle of wits going on. Personally, for me, that part, I felt, not that I dislike enemies to lovers trope per se, always. It's not that. It's just in this particular book, the way it was written, the girl I felt was just like it was one of those beam in your eye and the mote in somebody else's eye situations, but she totally didn't see it, which is very human. So, that happens. People do that, right? But it was a little bit frustrating reading it from her perspective. And she's always seeing the imperfections and the flaws in the guy, but not seeing how she has those exact same flaws or character attributes or those actions. She's doing the very same exact thing as he is, but maybe even worse, and she doesn't realize it. She's completely blind to that. And I'm not sure. I think what further frustrates me is I don't feel like that was ever fully addressed in the book. Her blind side to her own failings. I think it just kind of gets a little bit glossed over, and she does grow and she comes to see the value of the gentleman and his, behavior, and his character is not what she immediately thinks of it when she first meets him. She realizes that she has wronged him in casting aspersions on his character. But she, I don't think, ever comes to a true full realization of how blind she was to her own failures and flaws as they appeared in the story. That was the first thing. The other thing that kind of bothered me was at a crucial point in the story. So this is maybe a spoiler alert. So if you don't want to hear this, then you can just go to the next section. Before I say the spoilery stuff, I will say that I wanted to DNF it a few times in the first half of it. But once I got to the second half where she kind of stopped maligning the other guy and stopped arguing with him all the time and instead started to enjoy his company, and they understood each other better, that was much more likable, enjoyable, and I finished it to the end, and it was fun. It was satisfactory. It was a satisfying story. I enjoyed it in the end. It's clean. There's nothing really objectionable in it. So if you just want a clean, easy, fun read set in a Regency house party, it's a good book. It's a good one. All right, now for the spoilery stuff, if you don't want to hear it, just skip to the next section. So she is one day in this story, still earlier on, like not quite to the midway point, or maybe around the midway point. She goes for a horse ride with the other guy, and he shows her a new foal that has been born within the past several months or whatever on the estate. And so she meets this foal. is already being described as someone who's not really a horsewoman. She hasn't had much opportunity to ride horses. She barely knows how to do it. She's a little bit anxious about being on a horse. She wants a very gentle horse. And this foal that she meets is the offspring of the gentle mare that she has been given to ride while she's there. And so when she meets the foal, it's kind of like, apologies to anyone who is a dog person, it's kind of like me with dogs. When strange dogs that I don't know, like if I go to somebody's house or just out and about, like there were tons of dogs at the farmers markets today. If somebody's strange dog comes up to me and starts like sniffing all over me, or worse, climbing up on top of me, I'm a little bit like put off. Not scared, just like not sure what to do. I just don't want the dog to be climbing on me, okay? Like it's okay if the dog is there, like right there, that's fine. But on my person, not so much. So she's kind of like that with this horse, which I totally understand. I'm not faulting her for that. If you don't grow up on a farm, if you don't have your own dog as a pet, you know, you don't really know what to do with them, right? And or interact with them. So she wasn't an animal person, she wasn't a horse person, so she didn't really know what to do with this foal. She thought it was cute, but when it starts like, you know, running up to her and butting into her, and I think she even like falls over, she's not sure what to do. She's a little bit nervous. She's a little bit like, foal, horse, I'm a city girl, I don't know what to do. So, you know, no big deal. For someone who's not a horse person myself, I would probably be the very same way. It's silly, but there you go. That's not the problem. The problem is that I had with the story. The very next day, there is a storm. The animals get loose and they have to go round up the various animals. So all of the men, appropriately, and the servants are out catching the loose animals and returning them to the barn, to the fold, whatever. And she is just quite sure that they're just not going to get the job done correctly. I mean, how could they? Without her assistance. She's like her third or fourth day living in this estate that she's never been to before. She's ridden around the grounds maybe twice with someone. She's not a horsewoman by her own admission and experience. But she's quite sure that they need her help to go and round up, especially the brand new foal that kind of knocked her off her feet literally the day before, that she was unsure of how to interact with. But she was quite sure that she was the only one who could help with this. So she goes out and she just knows those guys are not going to look in the right place for the foal because she's got it all figured out. So I believe she takes the mare, the mother of the foal, to go and find the missing foal. And of course, she is the one who finds it, even though she doesn't know where she is on the estate. And there's a storm going and she's like sopping wet and she's out in the woods and she doesn't care about any of that because she's going to save this foal. And she goes and saves the foal. And then it's like eating a nut or something, or it ate a nut and nobody can figure out what's wrong with it. And she realizes that it's choking, like the nut is lodged in the horse's throat and he's choking and he can't breathe. And that's why he's like crumpled on the ground. And so one of the guys who they find her somehow miraculously on this huge estate, they find her and the foal around the same time she finds the foal also. So one of the guys is able to dislodge the nut from the foal, and yay, she saved the foal's life because she's just that good. So I'm sorry if that was excessively snarky. I do apologize. I'm not trying to be snarky, but I just the unbelievability of it. I mean, you know, a story is not a real story, obviously. It's fictional, etc. But there is a point where the characters should behave in a way consistent with the way the author has previously presented them. And that behavior should not be lauded as heroic or good. In my estimation, she was frankly just stupid. Like, and a little bit arrogant to think that all of the gentleman who owns the estate and his servants, you know, who help him raise the animals, And his friends who are visiting him, who have visited him many times and are familiar with the estate, she thinks that they can't do it, but she can, who's a girl who's never even ridden a horse, really, and barely knows how to ride a horse and doesn't know what to do with the foal in the first place and doesn't know this particular estate. That's where it's not even, we're not even talking about, the believability of a plot or something happening, but the believability that a person in that situation could or should act in that way. I thought it I rolled my eyes so hard they almost went up inside my head when I read that part of the story. But then as it went on, it improved from there. That was kind of like the main thing that I was like, really, girl? So apologies if that is too harsh of an assessment of that. I can have very strong opinions sometimes. So I do apologize for that. But in the end, it was fine. I was glad I read it. It was a good story, clean, worth reading. So there you go. That's one that I read. And the other fiction that I read was The Last Bookshop in London. And this one is, let me see, on the middle shelf for Historathon 4.0. On the middle shelf, her third prompt was a book with book in the title. So The Last Bookshop in London was one that I had been wanting to read anyway, and I borrowed it from my sister. Thanks, sister. And I read it and I enjoyed it very much, with some caveats. So first, the things that I really loved about this book. I loved how the character, the main character in the story, Grace, first of all, she was very well named because she definitely fulfills the role of Grace in the story. And it's not a Christian book. It's not published by a Christian publisher. It's Hanover Square Press. I'm pretty sure that's just general market fiction. And but she definitely fills that role in the way that she interacts with people and whatever. Her name was obviously purposely chosen, and that's what she represents. She is not originally in the story much of a reader, and she kind of resists working at this bookshop, and it's not really a very, when she goes there, it's not really a very pleasant working atmosphere. But she has some experience in retail and in that kind of business aspect, and she's got a good instinct for it. So she does a good job in bringing the bookshop to life, and she develops a good relationship with the elderly shop owner and becomes kind of a mentor to her, kind of a grandfatherly figure, which she's lacking in her life, and or fatherly figure maybe. And so that part I really enjoyed. Well done. She learns to love to read as she was working in this shop, and there are quite a few stories that she reads throughout the book, and they impact her or influence her in one way or other. So there's a lot of a theme here of how books affect us, how they give us empathy, how they help us to see situations around us and to understand people and things. There's also some aspect of how books reflect culture and interact with culture. Some of the books that were published and popular and or not popular at the beginning of World War II in London, it's interesting to read about that from a reader's perspective. Very interesting element to the story. I also put several books on my to-read list in Goodreads because the book she was reading sounded intriguing, and I looked them up and I was even more intrigued. So found some good books to add to my never-ending TBR. So that's always a plus, right? Also, it's a sweet story, and it kind of gives you at the end some It's a Wonderful Life sort of vibes. It's not a Christmassy story in any way, but just the way the community comes together, and she realizes that the impact that she's had on our community just by being who she is, and they come to help her in her time of need. It's very similar to It's a Wonderful Life in that way. So very heartwarming story, a good one to read this time of year, because even though there is a Christmas season that is celebrated in here early on in the war in London, and so there's some Christmassy stuff. So as we're heading into the Christmas season, this is a good one to keep in mind if you haven't read it yet. It would be it's a very cozy Christmassy sort of read that will give you feel good, heartwarming vibes that you'll enjoy. But that's also kind of the flip side of that coin. I felt like it was a little bit saccharine, like a little bit too sweet. It came across to me sometimes a little bit like a Victorian morality tale, kind of in the way that it was told. Like the point was a little bit too obvious. And I also felt like the narrative was more telling and less showing. I would have liked a little more showing. I would have liked to have read more of the letters that she exchanged with her friend and her love interest, who's not a huge part of the story. It's not really a romance. The romance is mostly off page. But I would have liked to have read the letters that they exchanged, because they mostly were exchanging letters, was the bulk of their relationship. And I feel like I would have known him better as a character, because he's just very shadowy in this story. And then when he returns and they're together, it's like, oh, hi, stranger. Yeah, hi. Oh, you're kissing. Okay, that's good. Nice. Okay, alrighty then. Anyways, kind of like, weird. But overall, I definitely enjoyed this story. I think as I got to the final page, I was like, okay, I'll give this 4 stars on Goodreads. And when I was, at the midpoint, I was like, 3 stars, maybe. But by the end, definitely solid 4 stars. With the caveat, it's a little bit overly sweet in some ways. Um, and then a little bit too much. The narrative was a little bit dry and distant, and that it told everything rather than showing everything. So, but still very good. And if you like World War II novels, if you like historic fiction, if you like um, books set in London, you will like this. If you like it not to have too much romance, it doesn't have much romance in it, so you will enjoy that aspect of it. And also very clean. I think there was one British cuss word in there. I don't think there was any other cussing. So, good, clean selection if you are always looking for books like that, like I am. And then finally, this is a little bit of a cheat because I've not finished it yet, but I did finish part 1. And so I'm going to treat part 1 as a book and part 2 as a book, because basically they're the length of a book. So also I don't want to spend too much time on it in one video. So I'll talk about the part 1 that I finished in today. And then next week I'll wrap up with parts 2 and 3. So part 1 is laying the groundwork of the theology of heaven. And I just love how deep I mean, he's obviously very deeply studied the subject of heaven in the Bible, very deeply. I don't think, okay, I've not read many books about heaven, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say I highly doubt that many other authors or theologians have taken the time to dig so deeply into the topic as he did, which is a little bit surprising because, I mean, who wouldn't want to study heaven? But he points out in the first couple of chapters, he goes through a whole bunch of texts about theology and doctrine, etc. And he discusses how very few of them say much, if anything, about heaven. And it's true. I mean, I haven't, like I said, I haven't read much about heaven. And a lot of theology books don't really get into it too much, but it's kind of the point, right? Like, that's where we'll spend eternity. This life on earth is but a blip, and heaven is going to be everything. So we should probably take a little more time to find out what we're in for, what we're getting into, right? So that's the whole point of this book. And Randy Alcorn does a deep dive, and I mean a deep dive, into what the Bible says on heaven. And what surprises me, it shouldn't, but it surprises me as I'm reading it, I realize how much the theology and the doctrine of heaven impacts the theology and doctrine of basically everything else. You can't just talk about heaven without talking about soteriology and eschatology and all of these other things about the church. Every other doctrine is affected by the doctrine of heaven. And so he kind of has to dig into all of those as well. And really, there's a bit of a paradigm shift as well, probably for most people who read this book. So his primary thesis is that heaven, the future eternal heaven, where we will all spend eternity with God, that we look forward to when after Jesus' second coming and his final victory, that heaven, the future heaven, is called the new heaven and the new earth in the Bible. And his primary thesis, Randy Alcorn's primary thesis, is that it is our earth remade and heaven coming down to it and the two becoming one. So the new heaven is also called the New Jerusalem, I believe. And so, there are many verses, there's several verses that say that the new heaven came down to the new earth. And so his theory is that they become one. So right now there's a divide, whether it's a physical divide or a spiritual divide or a visual divide, which I think may be the most likely, and that we just can't see heaven. And we can't see the spiritual beings, angels, God, etc. We cannot see all of the aspects of heaven because we don't have the spiritual eyes to see it right now. We're bound by our flesh and time and space and everything right now, and by sin mostly. So we don't see heaven. There's a barrier there. But when we have the new heaven and the new earth, that barrier, whatever it looks like, will be removed. And so heaven and earth will be kind of one. And the earth will be resurrected and redeemed and perfected just like our bodies will. And if that's a new concept, you might be like, wait, what? That does not sound like anything I've ever been taught. I encourage you to read this because he lays the groundwork very convincingly. And if you look at scripture as a whole, I feel like all of those puzzle pieces fit and it makes so much sense. I mean, like, things were falling into place for me all over the places. I was reading this part one and I was like creating an entire picture for me. I had always thought of the future heaven and earth as being a physical place and people having physical bodies. I feel like the Bible's pretty clear about that. I never had thought of it as being exclusively a spiritual realm per se. Having said that, in our popular culture, and when we, have a fleeting thought about heaven or whatever, the predominant aspect it takes in our mind is one of a spiritual realm, or which he calls a disembodied realm, that is not on earth as we know it. And really, we need to shift our thinking, according to Randy Alcorn in his study in the Bible, that actually our life in heaven is going to have distinct, similar, it's going to be very much like what we are familiar with in earth, except redeemed and perfect without any sin in it. And it takes a whole book like this to explain exactly what that looks like. So my 5 minutes here on this video is not going to thoroughly be able to examine that concept. But he wrote the book, so you don't have to listen to me talk about it. You can read the book yourself. And I highly recommend that you do, because I felt like even though his primary thesis was not a new concept for me, the practical implications of it, many of them I had never considered. And he doesn't take any word in scripture for granted. Every scripture passage that is talking about heaven and our eternity with God in the future, he has meditated over and studied and analyzed the language and the grammar and the context and the compared it against other scriptures, similar scriptures in the Bible. And it just creates such a beautiful full picture and fills in some spots that were fuzzy in my mind personally and made them a lot clearer, and strengthened things that I had thought, answered some questions that I had. It doesn't answer everything because there's much that we don't know. So not everything, some questions that we have, well, there won't be an answer to until we're there. And nobody's really going to know what it's like until we're there, right? Because it's outside the realm of our understanding, honestly. Because we've never been to heaven, and we can't until we die. And if we're dead, then we're not making YouTube videos. So anyway, it was just, it filled in all those spots for me, put some puzzle pieces together, created a clear picture for me. There are still some missing puzzle pieces that won't be put into place until we are all in heaven and the new earth one day. But It has been such a wonderful read. It's so encouraging and it's been challenging and motivating me because thinking about heaven changes how you interact with daily life. Honestly, it gives you a much better vision about the here and now as much as it does about the future. So, there we go. So I didn't do too poorly. Nobody came and interrupted me, and I'm sure I a lot, but whatever. We're just gonna leave him in there. And so I apologize, and any rambling spots, forgive me, and I'll try to be a little more polished next time around. So that was my week. I hope you enjoyed it. I highly recommend the book Heaven by Randy Alcorn if you are even remotely interested in the topic. And even if you're not, I still recommend it. I think you would enjoy reading it. And I will see you next time.